Imagine waking up on a winter morning where your breath instantly freezes into a thin crust of ice on your lips. The wind outside slicing through the valley like an invisible blade, and the sun not entirely sure it even wants to rise. And yet, in this world locked in ice, the Vikings still stepped out of bed with an almost unsettling calm, as if the cold were nothing more than an old, familiar guest. The secret lay in where they slept. The semi-buried longhouses their ancestors never saw as architecture, but as living creatures. Thermal machines powered by earth, moss, livestock heat, and the memory of countless generations. Every log laid down, every turf block pressed into a gap, every patch of moss packed tight along the walls was a survival decision refined through hundreds of winters. The grass-covered roofs sloped just enough for snow to gather, turning the cold into a second layer of insulation. The walls stood heavy as fortresses, trapping warmth inside, and the earthen floors fed with straw, clay, and dry dung smoldered gently like the slow heartbeat of the entire home. In an age with no insulation bricks, no double-pane windows, no modern fireplaces, the Vikings built a warm fortress, using nothing but ingenuity and patience against a merciless nature. And if you find that incredible, leave a thought in the comments, because this is only the first doorway into the secrets of the Viking winter. If anyone thinks the Vikings survived winter by relying on fire alone, they've misunderstood everything. The real enemy of the Nordic winter wasn't the blizzard. It was the cold that seeped under your feet, streamed down the walls, and poured from the roof like an invisible tide. And it was at this seemingly weakest point that the Vikings built one of the most primitive yet brilliant insulation systems of the ancient world. Beneath their feet was never bare, frozen stone. It was a layered assembly of materials placed in an almost ritual order: wood, clay, straw, plant fibers, dry dung, and fermented paja. The slow decomposition of those layers released a steady, almost imperceptible warmth, just enough to keep life breathing through nights when temperatures dropped to suffocating lows. Meanwhile, the thick wooden walls, packed with turf and sealed with dry moss, didn't just block the wind like a fortress. They held heat the way the hide of an animal evolved for the frozen north would. Above, the lightly sloped sod roof, nurtured all summer, waited to become a second skin when snow settled on it, turning that blinding enemy into a loyal ally. A Viking house didn't fight the cold. It trapped heat, swallowed winter, and forced the season itself to retreat. There's a secret most people don't believe until they see it with their own eyes. The Vikings, the people who lived among ice and wind sharp enough to cut skin, possessed a food preservation system so sophisticated it would make modern engineers bow their heads. Beneath every longhouse, every granary, and sometimes even under the yard where children played, existed dark chambers they didn't call storage. They called them the stomago della tierra, the stomach of the earth. What makes this system astonishing isn't that these chambers were dug deep, but that they maintained a stable temperature of 2 to 4 degrees Celsius year-round, using no fire, no ice, and no miracle other than inherited memory. They chose the location based on wind direction, the slope of the ground, the moisture of the moss growing around the pit's mouth, then lined the interior with stone, hardened clay, and bundles of dried herbs to control airflow. One cellar for roots, one for grain, one solely for cured meat or smoked fish. But the biggest twist is this. Some pits excavated in Hedeby and Holland contain seeds more than 700 years old. still capable of sprouting. Their system didn't just preserve food, it preserved life itself and the genetic future of their people. In an age where we panic if the fridge loses power for half a day, the Vikings survived year after year with nothing but earth, stone, and the wisdom of the village elders. It makes you wonder, have we truly advanced or just become more dependent? If this detail surprised you, leave a comment and share what you think made that ancient system far beyond what we imagine about the Vikings. In the Viking world, where winter didn't kill with screams but with a silence that never ended, food wasn't just food. It was an early warning system. Every turnip, every beetroot, every root sleeping beneath the earth wasn't simply waiting to be cooked. It was a living sensor the whole family depended on to know whether winter was standing with them or preparing to betray them. A root that dried too quickly signaled the cellar was too dry. One that began breathing early revealed rising humidity. A small patch of fungus could be the sign of a slow death. And here's the twist. One misplaced root was enough to ruin the entire storage, meaning the whole family wouldn't survive to see spring. So every few days, someone in the clan climbed down into the cellar with a task that was simple but brutal: taste. The Vikings called them the catador, but in truth, they were the ones who accepted risk on behalf of everyone else, using their own bodies to check whether the silence of the roots was hiding a dangerous rot. Not heroes, not martyrs, but the final biological shield between starvation and the people they loved. In our modern civilization, we have humidity sensors, thermal cameras, even AI monitoring cold storage. In the Viking Age, the survival of an entire bloodline sometimes depended on the palate of a single human being. In the land where the sun vanished for weeks and the cold pulled heat from the body faster than any blade, the Vikings understood something modern people have forgotten. When you eat matters just as much as what you eat. Their breakfast was never something light. It was the opening strike in the war against heat loss. A thick, heavy potager simmered through the night with starchy roots, coarse ground grains, dried meat, and melted SIBO. Not because it tasted good, but because it burned slowly, keeping the body warm from the inside, the way a firekeeper relies on charcoal instead of dry twigs. By midday, when the morning energy was close to fading, they shifted to protein and fat to maintain endurance, prevent heat crashes, and fight exhaustion. Smoked fish, cured meat, hard bread mixed with grease, all timed to a rhythm they never named but lived by instinct. Evening was different, lighter but mandatory. Vikings never went to sleep hungry because they knew too well that an empty stomach stole heat so quickly that there might be no one left to wake the next morning. Even children, elders, and pregnant women had their own portions and eating schedules based on the cold, their health, and the work they had done that day. For them, a meal wasn't a family ritual. It was the final thermal mechanism, standing between winter and survival. In the Viking world, where the cold didn't scream but stalked like a creature waiting for the right moment, sleep never meant rest. At night, the wind slipping through the sod roof made a sound like someone breathing right behind you. The warmth from each person's mouth froze into tiny, drifting crystals in the air, and the space between two bodies, if it widened even slightly, became a crack through which death slid in like a conscious shadow. They knew too well that if one person drifted out of formation, if anyone leaned toward the outer edge, By morning, that body would be stiff as stone, without a cry, without a single warning. This wasn't a tale to frighten children. It was a rule carved into the memory of every household by hundreds of winters.
Thank you.
So they slept in a formation that was almost ritual. Bodies half-sitting, leaning into each other, forming a closed arc, with children and elders placed in the center and the strongest on the outside, serving as walls of flesh and breath. Against the cold, waiting to slip through the timber seams. In the middle of the night, when someone rose to tend the fire or check the livestock, the sleeping circle shifted on instinct, sealing whatever gap had opened, as if the house itself knew how to protect the living. And in that silence, heavy as ash, everyone understood what no one ever said out loud. In a Viking night, sleeping in the wrong place was the stupidest way to die. If this detail sent a chill down your spine, leave a comment and tell us whether you could survive a single night sleeping like a Viking. In the Viking winter, where a fire could die from a single stray gust and human warmth was as fragile as a thread, livestock were never seen as future food. They were living thermal engines, powered by their breath, their muscles, and their own instinct to fight the cold. A full-grown cow, simply standing, still in an enclosed space, could raise the room temperature by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, small on paper, but in a night of 20 degrees Celsius, that was the line between sleep and death. It wasn't accidental that the Vikings placed their cattle right beside the sleeping area. The position of each animal was arranged as carefully as the formation of a warrior band. Cows along the main wall, pigs near the food stores, chickens above, so their rising heat could fill the corners human bodies couldn't reach. But what pushed this system to the edge of genius was the bedding beneath them. Straw, ash, and humus layered in cycles to absorb moisture, neutralize odor, and generate slow, steady heat. No one called it science, but each night the barn floor warmed bit by bit, sending heat through the wooden walls and keeping the house from dropping into lethal temperatures. For the Vikings, livestock weren't just wealth. They were silent partners, the last barrier against the white cold waiting to swallow the world outside. Vikings didn't keep cows for milk. They kept them to survive the night. If this detail surprised you, leave a comment and tell us which animal you think was the most effective heater of the ancient world. In the Viking world, warmth never belonged to any one person. It was a shared resource, a trophy the whole community had to work together to keep. And because of that, anyone who broke that rhythm, even with a small act of selfishness, would feel the coldest sentence winter could deliver. On long nights when the wind hissed through the sod roof like a warning, the longhouse functioned like a living thermal machine. Elders at the center, children shielded, the strong forming the outer line. But if someone was lazy, skipped straw gathering, avoided fire duty, or kept food for themselves, the community didn't need shouting or beatings. They did only one thing: pushed that person to the edge of the sleeping circle, where the cold arrived first, where warmth never reached, where one single night could turn a body into a silent block of ice. There were no threats, no arguments, only a truth everyone understood from childhood. Keeping warm was a duty, and getting cold was the consequence. In the Viking world, punishment wasn't a whip. It was being sent to the coldest corner of winter. If you think this punishment is scarier than any battlefield, leave a comment and tell us whether you could survive in a community like that. Don't think the Vikings simply endured. the cold, and waited for spring to open its doors. It was in the frozen months, when the wind howled outside like a white curse and daylight flickered for only a few hours, that their biggest decisions were born. Inside the dim longhouse, where every breath froze into a thin mist, the clan leaders sat shoulder to shoulder around the red fire, their eyes reflecting the flames like hidden blades. They weren't discussing hunting or crops. They were redrawing the world.
What do you see?
Every wooden stick placed on the clay floor, every carved mark on a hideboard, every whisper woven between the wind's hiss held the position of a harbor, a poorly defended village, a trader who needed alliance, a river that would thaw in the fourth week. This wasn't conversation. It was a national council held in darkness, where a single mistake could cost the clan in blood. Outside, snow slapped the walls as if trying to eavesdrop, while inside, plans flowed like an underground current. How many ships would sail? How many warriors were strong enough to row? How many trade goods could be exchanged for weapons? And most importantly, where the enemy's weak point would be once winter finally pulled back. Winter, for them, wasn't a season of hibernation, but a time to sharpen claws. Viking raids weren't born in spring. They were designed in the darkness of winter. If this detail gave you chills in a different way, leave a comment and tell us which of their strategies you think was the most dangerous. If you've ever thought the Vikings survived only through muscle or walls thick as fortresses, then there's something you haven't seen. They conquered winter with their minds. When the darkness stretched so long, you couldn't tell the wind's howl from your own heartbeat. When the longhouse held nothing but the faint red pulse of dying embers, what kept them alive wasn't just architecture or food. It was the ability to keep their spirit from slipping into the abyss of isolation. Because cold kills in two ways. It shuts down breath, and it shuts down will. That's why tight sleeping circles, shared meals, and late-night storytelling weren't traditions. They were psychological strategies refined over centuries. The old ones understood that if the mind collapsed, the body would follow instantly. Every child raised under a sod roof, groaning in the wind, learned to sense what modern people no longer feel. When the community was wobbling, when someone was weakening, when it was time to gather warmth, words, or hands to hold each other steady. And it was thanks to that invisible network that they emerged from winter not as survivors, but as a community reforged. Winter taught them a lesson the modern world rarely remembers. Temperatures can drop, fires can die, but a person only truly perishes when they stop caring for one another. If you feel this lesson still belongs in today's world, leave a thought below and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, where we uncover why our ancestors stood firm through winters we can barely dare to look at from behind glass.